way back in January, it seems like another world, I offered a talk on cultivating a heart unshaken, and really working with issues of the isms that we deal with in our world and with diversity. And then the week after that, we offered, a group of us offered together a writing that we had created that kind of outlines IMCC's philosophy toward social engagement. And I've given you, you should each have a paper that has that on it. I'm going to read it to you. You can follow along with me. And so tonight we want to do the third part of that. There's been a long pause in between, but the third part of that is really inquiring into how we can bring these teachings into specific action in our lives. And by action, I don't mean like being out on the street corner necessarily with a sign, but just like, how do we live into these teachings? Which is really what our teachings are about anyway. So we wanted to kind of bring it a little bit more personally into that kind of an inquiry tonight. And I'll talk you through that in just a second. But here I want to read you this, and you can either listen or follow along with me. This is what our community developed together. Through meditation practice, we develop insight into the interconnected nature of being and of all phenomena. We cultivate qualities of the mind, heart, and ethical behavior, which together have the capacity to guide us in skillful response to pain and suffering in ourselves and in the world. For some IMCC members, our solitary meditation leads to the expression of spiritual practice not only in daily life, but also as commitment to wider social action. The goal of our social engagement is to speak and act from wisdom, as well as from kindness, compassion, joy in others' goodness, and equanimity, with the aim of diminishing suffering for all beings without exception. Our actions, thus, are offerings performed in the spirit of service, attempts to concretely express the truth of universal love and non-separation as articulated in the Buddhist teachings. These actions inevitably provide a mirror that reflects ways in which we achieve or fall short of our aspiration. Thus, they are ongoing teachings from which we learn together to deepen in our spiritual practice. Ruth King was here last week with some pretty awesome teachings through the week, guiding us into deep inquiry into our own relationship to social engagement, and in particular the profound suffering of racism in our lives and in our world. Again, with the aim of diminishing suffering for all beings without exception. And for all beings without exception, of course, is wider still. We can broaden this to all sorts of isms with which we in our daily life and our relationships and our world suffers. People who are different from us. Maybe family members who differ politically or in terms of religious or spiritual beliefs. Bigotry of all sorts, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, gender discrimination of all kinds, sexism, people with differing abilities, including what are called disabilities, class differences, just all sorts of differences, all sorts of diversity that we are invited to just come into relationship with each day, and indeed to live into these teachings with each day. They sound really good, as we read them or as we listen to them, and even as we speak them. But then, how do I really live into this? Ajahn Sumedho tells a story about diversity. He says that there was a nun once when he was in Thailand, in the monastery with Ajahn Chah, that there was a nun who was just exemplary in her spiritual practice. And in his, when visitors would come or people would come, he would often point to her, or to the other monastics, he would point to her as someone to emulate, as just someone whose spiritual practice was really exemplary. And he found out from someone else one day that she had left the monastery, she had disrobed and was going to join a fundamentalist Christian community. And he was desolate, he was devastated. And he went to Ajahn Chah and he said, how can this be? What is this? She's doing this thing, this is crazy. She's leaving, these profound teachings. Here you are, an enlightened master, and she's leaving you. She's going to a fundamental Christian community. And Ajahn Chah said, maybe she's right. Really, really allowing diversity, really engaging, letting go of views, letting go of opinions, really allowing things to be different. So I'm going to guide you in a minute to inquire together, but I'd like to invite you to consider a place in your life where there might be something that's a mirror for you. I can think of several in my life where really deeply respecting and allowing diversity is a real challenge. It'd be like, just everything is fine, but just not this, really. So to consider a relationship or a situation which for you becomes a bit of a mirror into the ways that, like Ajahn Sumedho, for all beings without exception, is challenging. I've spoken at times not only of my own relationship to things in the news or to my relatives, diminishing suffering for all beings without exception, and that includes ourselves. I offered a little bit of guidance during the meditation, the ways we turn on ourselves when we're different from how we think we should be. Whatever that might be, for all beings without exception. So the inquiry is, in this relationship, this circumstance, how do we operationalize these teachings? Tomorrow morning, when I roll over and wake up and put on my slippers and make my tea and pet the cat and go out into the day. How do I do this? Larry Yang, a friend of mine, offers some trainings trainings of the mind and diversity, and that's on the other side of your page. And so I'm going to invite us to maybe to get together in smaller groups and to inquire together into these trainings. And I would just like to point out that he calls them trainings. They're not like, here's how you're supposed to be, and you're supposed to jump all over yourself if you're not like that. That isn't what he calls them. But trainings, just like our whole practice. Trainings, something to orient ourselves for, to aim for. Ruth King, in her book, asks, in this situation, what can I learn or open to? What can I let go of? How do I act in this challenging situation with clarity and in a non-harming way? And again, this situation might include some aspect of yourself that is different from how you think it should be.